When I told my parents I wanted to pursue a dream as small as opening a local art studio, they laughed. "Why don't you get a real job, Sarah?" my mom said, while my dad nodded, his face full of that familiar skepticism. At 31, I wasn't a kid anymore. I wasn't looking for their approval. I was simply sharing what I had hoped could become my future. But it didn't go as planned. No one took me seriously. The thought of choosing something so unconventional, the art world, seemed laughable to them. My name is Sarah Thompson, and I'm 31 years old. I've always known that I was different, but the decision to choose this path was mine, and mine alone. I wasn't looking for validation. I was looking for freedom. The same freedom I'd felt when I first picked up a paintbrush, unsure of where it would lead me. I was tired of following everyone else's dreams. For once, I wanted to create my own. But all I received in return were mocking remarks and concerned sighs. "You should think about your future, Sarah," they said. "This isn't going to last." I could feel the weight of their doubt pressing down on me, but it only made me more determined. So, I took a deep breath and told them, "I'm doing this. Whether you support me or not, I'm doing this." The next few months were hard. The initial thrill of starting my own studio faded quickly as the reality of running a business set in. There were no guarantees, no safety net. I worked long hours, scraping together every penny I could to pay for supplies and rent. My parents were right about one thing: it was hard. But there was something else they didn't see: the spark of joy in my heart when I finished a painting, the pride I felt when a customer bought one of my pieces, or the satisfaction of seeing my own work displayed in a local gallery. That, to me, was worth more than any conventional job. But then, everything changed. One day, while I was going through some paperwork, I received a phone call that would flip everything on its head. "Ms. Thompson," the voice on the other end said, "we're pleased to inform you that your art has been selected for a national exhibition." I couldn't believe it. This was it. This was the moment that would change my life forever. I was going to prove to my parents, to everyone who doubted me, that I wasn't just dreaming small. I was dreaming big, and I was making it happen. I'll never forget the look on their faces when I showed them the contract. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of excitement and uncertainty. I spent every waking hour perfecting my art, trying to balance my passion with the pressures of running a business. I was starting to see the fruits of my labor, but I still had moments of doubt. What if this wasn't enough? What if I wasn't cut out for this after all? But then, each time a customer walked into my studio and left with a painting or a new commission arrived, those doubts began to fade. Slowly, I was building something real, something tangible. I wasn't just some girl with a small dream anymore. I was becoming a legitimate artist, and people were noticing. The most surprising part, however, was how the success started to change things between me and my parents. They had watched me struggle, then scoffed at my ambition, but now they were starting to see the impact. One evening, I invited them to the gallery where my work was being displayed. I could see the reluctance in their eyes as they walked in, unsure of what to expect. When they saw my paintings on the walls, though, their expressions softened. They spent time admiring the pieces, talking about how much they could see my style evolving, and how professional everything looked. My mom even commented, "This is really impressive, Sarah." For the first time, there was no judgment in her voice. I watched them as they interacted with my work, and I felt a surge of pride. I had done it. But it wasn't just the recognition that mattered. It was the shift in their perception of me, the way they began to see my choices as valid. I could tell they were proud, even if they didn't say it outright. And that was enough for me. When they left that night, my dad pulled me aside. He looked at me with a strange mixture of admiration and remorse. "We didn't understand," he admitted quietly. "But we see it now. We see what you've built." That was all I needed to hear. The road had been long and hard, but the respect I had fought for had finally arrived. I had chosen my path, and I had made it my own. As the months went by, things began to change even more. I started getting invitations to art shows, and my work began to gain recognition in the local community. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was walking in the direction I was meant to go. I wasn't just making ends meet, I was thriving. The gallery exhibitions turned into a steady stream of opportunities, and soon, I was featured in a few magazines. Every new milestone brought a sense of accomplishment, but it also came with a growing distance from my parents. Despite their initial approval, the more I succeeded, the more I felt them pulling away, almost as if my success was making them uncomfortable. They had never truly understood what it was like to follow a passion. For them, it was always about security, stability, and practicality. I could feel that old tension building up again, like the distance between us was growing wider each time I showed them the next big thing I had accomplished. One day, I invited them over to my studio to show them my latest project. I had just signed a deal with a well-known art distributor, and I was eager to share the news. When they arrived, I saw the same polite smiles they always gave me, but this time, there was something different in the air. "We're really proud of you, Sarah," my mom said, her voice warm but somewhat distant. It felt more like a formality than genuine pride. I could sense it in the way they looked around my studio, admiring the work but not fully connecting with the person behind it. It was clear they were still struggling with the idea of me making a living out of something so unconventional. "This is a big deal," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm not just selling paintings now, I'm building a brand." My dad looked at me with a hesitant smile, and for a moment, I thought I saw something like regret flicker across his face. "You've certainly proven us wrong," he said slowly. It was the first time he had admitted it, and while it was a small victory, it felt hollow. I realized that even though I had accomplished so much, something was still missing. Their acceptance, while important, wasn't going to be enough for me anymore. I had made it on my own terms, and that was all that mattered. The more I grew, the more the reality of my success settled in. I was finally living the life I had dreamed of, but with it came an unexpected sense of isolation. As my career took off, my parents seemed to drift further away, despite their earlier words of approval. They no longer asked about my work, no longer showed up to my events. At first, I told myself it was just busy lives, that they were preoccupied with their own things. But deep down, I knew there was more to it. One evening, after a particularly successful exhibition, I decided to invite them over for dinner, hoping that this time, they would truly see me for who I had become. When they walked in, I could feel the tension in the air. They were polite, as usual, but there was something colder between us now. My mom admired the paintings, but her comments were distant, more like pleasantries than genuine interest. "You've come a long way, Sarah," she said, but it didn't sound like praise. It sounded like an observation from a stranger, not from someone who had watched me grow. I sat there, trying to keep the conversation light, but the silence between us grew heavier with each passing minute. Finally, my dad spoke. "You've made something of yourself," he said. His words were vague, almost like a statement of fact rather than a compliment. It was the first time he had spoken like this, and it hit me harder than I expected. "I've worked hard for this, Dad," I replied, my voice steady. "I didn't just stumble into it. It's everything I've wanted." But even as the words left my mouth, I realized that it wasn't enough. Their approval, once so important to me, no longer held the same weight. It had taken me this long to understand. I didn't need them to validate my success. I had built it on my own, and that was something no one could take away from me. That night, as I cleaned up the dishes after they left, I felt a strange peace settle over me. I had spent so many years chasing their approval, but now I was free. I had finally become the person I was meant to be, not for them, but for myself. It had been a few months since I had finally stopped seeking approval, and in that time, I had become more confident, more secure in the life I had built. I had learned to embrace the loneliness that came with following a path so different from the one my parents had envisioned for me. It wasn't easy, but there was a freedom in it I hadn't expected. I started to realize that this success wasn't just about the art, or the exhibitions, or the deals. It was about reclaiming my sense of self, about doing something I loved without needing anyone else's validation. But even with all the success, there were moments when doubt crept in. I had built something on my own, but part of me still yearned for my parents' acceptance. I missed the days when their pride in me had been a driving force. As I sat in my studio one evening, sketching new ideas for my next big project, I received a call that would change everything. It was from a prestigious gallery in New York, offering me a solo exhibition. The opportunity felt surreal, like everything I had worked for had suddenly come to fruition. I had made it. This was my moment, the one I had been waiting for. But as the excitement washed over me, I felt a familiar twinge of hesitation. I couldn't help but think about what my parents would say. Would they finally see me as successful? Would they finally recognize that my dream had always been bigger than what they had imagined for me? I dialed their number with a sense of anticipation, not sure what to expect. When my mom answered, I could hear the surprise in her voice. "Sarah? What's going on?" I hesitated for a moment, then told her about the exhibition, the opportunity to showcase my work in New York. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before she spoke. That's amazing, Sarah," she said, her tone softer than I expected. "We're proud of you." Those words, so simple and yet so profound, were all I needed to hear. In that moment, I realized that it didn't matter how long it took for them to understand my path. What mattered was that I had found my own way, and I was living it fully. Their approval was just a bonus, but I no longer needed it to feel complete. The gallery exhibition in New York was just around the corner, and with each passing day, the reality of what I had achieved began to settle in. It wasn't just the opportunity that was overwhelming, but the recognition that came with it. Invitations to interviews, press features, and a growing social media following, everything seemed to be falling into place. But as much as I was grateful, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. There was a part of me that still wanted my parents to see me for who I truly was. It had been years since I had stopped seeking their approval, yet deep down, I still wondered if they were proud of me. The night before the exhibition, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the invitation I had just received in the mail. "You're invited to the opening of Sarah Thompson's solo art show." My name on an invitation. I smiled to myself, but it wasn't the satisfaction of success that made me smile. It was the thought of what this moment meant. I had done it. And yet, as I sat there, I realized that despite all the accolades, despite everything I had accomplished, I was still searching for validation from the very people who had once laughed at my dream. I decided, then and there, that the exhibition wasn't just for me. It was for them too. I wanted them to see what I had built, to see that the dream they had mocked had grown into something real, something beautiful. So, I called my parents and invited them to the opening. My heart raced as I dialed the number. When my mom picked up, her voice was warmer than usual, and I could feel the hesitation in the air. "Mom, I'm having my solo exhibition tomorrow night in New York. I'd love for you and Dad to come," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a long silence before she responded. "We'll be there," she said, almost too quickly. I wasn't sure what to expect, but when they arrived the next evening, something was different. My mom's eyes lingered on the paintings as she moved through the gallery, her admiration unspoken but evident in the way she looked at my work. My dad stood beside me, a proud smile on his face as he spoke to others about my achievements. For the first time, I felt like they truly saw me, not as a dreamer, not as someone chasing something unrealistic, but as someone who had turned her dreams into reality. And in that moment, I realized that I didn't need their approval to feel validated. But seeing them proud of me, seeing them finally understand, was the most fulfilling feeling of all. The weeks after the exhibition were a blur of media attention, new opportunities, and a growing sense of accomplishment. It was as if everything I had worked for was coming to fruition, and yet, the most fulfilling part wasn't the recognition, it was the way I felt about myself. I had done it. I had built something from the ground up, and now my dream was no longer small. It was bigger than I had ever imagined. But with success came new challenges. The pressure to keep up with the momentum was overwhelming at times, and there were moments when I questioned if I could maintain this level of success. Yet, every time those doubts crept in, I reminded myself of how far I had come. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. It was around this time that my parents, despite their previous hesitation, started to reach out more often. It wasn't much, just a call here and there to check in, but it meant something to me. They had finally come to understand that this path, this dream, wasn't a passing whim. It was my life now. One afternoon, my mom called me with a tone I hadn't heard in years. Sarah, she said, I've been thinking about how you've changed. How far you've come. I'm proud of you. I was speechless. The words I had waited so long to hear, the ones I had long since stopped expecting, were finally being spoken. Thank you, Mom, I said, my voice steady, though I could feel the tears welling up. For years, I had sought their approval, but in that moment, I realized I didn't need it anymore. I had already given myself the approval I had longed for. As I hung up the phone, I sat back and thought about everything I had accomplished. I had proven to myself that I could make it on my own, and I had done it without their validation. I had created a life for myself that I was proud of, and I wasn't going to let anything or anyone take that away from me. My parents' approval, while meaningful, was no longer the driving force behind my success. It was my own belief in myself that mattered most. As the years passed, my art continued to evolve, and so did I. The success I had found in my career was no longer just about the recognition or the accolades, it was about the peace I felt within myself. I had come a long way from the girl who was laughed at for dreaming too big. I had proven to myself that the dream I had was not only worth chasing, but it was possible to achieve. The fear and doubt that once held me back had all but vanished. There were still challenges ahead, there always would be, but I was no longer afraid of them. I had learned to trust myself, to believe in my own abilities, and to embrace the journey, no matter where it took me. Despite everything I had accomplished, there were moments when I couldn't help but reflect on the journey, on how different things could have been if I had chosen to follow the expectations of others. But those moments were fleeting, quickly replaced by a deep sense of gratitude for the path I had chosen. I looked around at the life I had built, at the studio that had once seemed like a distant dream, and I knew that every challenge had been worth it. In the quiet moments, when I stood in front of a new canvas, I felt the weight of everything that had led me to that point, the sacrifices, the hard work, the tears, and the joy. It was all there, in every brushstroke, in every piece of art that I created. One day, as I stood in my studio, finishing a piece that would be displayed in yet another gallery show, I thought about my parents. They had been distant for so long, but their words of pride had stayed with me. I didn't need their approval anymore to feel fulfilled, but I wanted them to know that I had made it. I had done what they never thought possible, and I had done it on my own terms. I decided to invite them to the opening of my next show. This time, I wasn't looking for validation. I was simply sharing a piece of my life with them, just as I had with the rest of the world. When they arrived, I could see the quiet pride in their eyes. It wasn't the loud, overwhelming praise I had once longed for, but it was enough. I had finally reached a place where I was truly at peace with who I was and what I had become. And that, in the end, was the greatest success of all. As the years passed, the gap between who I had been and who I was becoming widened, and with it came a deep sense of fulfillment. Every brushstroke, every new exhibition, every moment of creative expression brought me closer to the woman I had always wanted to be. I wasn't just living a dream anymore, I was creating a legacy, and it was mine. The art world had opened up to me in ways I hadn't even imagined, and I felt like I was on the edge of something much bigger. Yet, despite the external success, the quiet moments were where I truly found peace. I often found myself sitting in my studio late at night, reflecting on everything I had gone through. The years of doubt, the sacrifices, the fear of failure that had once gripped me so tightly. I had built something that was bigger than any fear. It was mine, and it would stand the test of time. But I wasn't the same person I had been when I first started. I was stronger now, more confident in my choices, more certain of the path I had taken. In a strange way, it felt like I had finally reconciled with my past, with the girl who had once longed for approval and validation from others. It wasn't that I didn't appreciate the people who had supported me along the way, but now I knew that the only approval I needed was my own. One day, as I looked over my upcoming exhibition, I thought back to the day when I first decided to step away from the crowd and carve my own path. The doubt I had felt, the fear that had almost stopped me from pursuing my dream, those feelings now felt like they belonged to someone else. I had surpassed that version of myself. And while my parents had finally come around, their approval wasn't what kept me going. It was the knowledge that I had done it for me, that I had followed my own instincts and had not once looked back. The life I was living was a testament to the power of self-belief, to the power of choosing a path for myself, even when others didn't understand. As I stood in front of a new canvas, ready to start another piece, I realized that this journey wasn't about proving anyone wrong or even proving anyone right. It was about proving to myself that I was capable of creating something beautiful, something lasting, all on my own terms. As time went on, I became more comfortable in my own skin, more confident in the decisions I had made. I had learned that success wasn't defined by others' standards, but by my own happiness and sense of achievement. The exhibitions continued, the recognition kept coming, and the studio felt more like home than ever. Yet, I realized something important one evening as I sat in the quiet of my studio. Despite all the success, despite everything I had accomplished, there was still a part of me that longed for deeper connection. I had built a life, a career, that I was incredibly proud of, but I couldn't deny the emptiness that crept in when I was alone. It wasn't loneliness in the traditional sense, it was a longing for something more meaningful. I had spent so much time proving myself, proving that I could make it on my own, that I had forgotten the importance of sharing that success with the people I loved. It wasn't about approval anymore. It was about connection. I thought about my parents, how much they had shaped the person I had become. They weren't just my family, they were part of my foundation, even if they had never fully understood my dream. I had spent so many years holding on to the idea that their acceptance was what I needed to be complete, but I had grown past that. Now, I realized that the success I had worked so hard for was only part of the equation. The other part, sharing it with those who mattered most, was what truly made it meaningful. So, I reached out. Not to prove anything, not to get validation, but simply to reconnect. I called my parents and invited them to a small, intimate gathering at my studio. No grand exhibition, no press, just me, my work, and the people I cared about. When they arrived, there was a quiet understanding between us. The words didn't need to be said. They had seen the growth, the change, the woman I had become. And in their eyes, I saw something I hadn't expected: pride, not just in my success, but in who I had become as a person. In that moment, I realized that the journey was never just about reaching the top. It was about bringing those who mattered with me along the way. As I stood in my studio, surrounded by the art I had created, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The noise of the world outside, the pressure to keep up with expectations, had faded into the background. For the first time in a long while, I was exactly where I wanted to be. It wasn't about the recognition or the accolades anymore. It was about the connection I had with my work and the people who truly mattered. I thought about how far I had come, from the girl who was laughed at for dreaming too big, to the woman standing here today, ready to face whatever came next. There was a certain quiet confidence that came with knowing I had built my life on my own terms. It wasn't just the art I had created, it was the life I had crafted for myself, one that felt authentic and true to who I was. And with that authenticity came a deep sense of satisfaction. For years, I had sought validation from others, but now I realized that I had been seeking it in the wrong places. It was never about proving myself to anyone. The real victory had been in proving to myself that I was capable, that I could follow my own path, no matter how unconventional. As the days passed and my work continued to grow, I started to feel a new sense of purpose. It wasn't just about art anymore. It was about sharing my journey with others, inspiring those who had once doubted themselves to take the leap and follow their own dreams. I thought back to my parents, to the way they had watched me struggle and grow, and I realized that their approval, though important, wasn't what fueled me anymore. What fueled me was the belief I had found in myself, the confidence that had been forged in the fires of doubt and uncertainty. It wasn't always easy, and there were still moments of self-doubt, but now, when I looked at my work, I saw more than just a collection of paintings. I saw a testament to everything I had been through, everything I had overcome. And for the first time, I was truly proud of who I had become. Looking back, I could hardly believe how far I had come. The path that once seemed so uncertain, so full of doubt, had led me to a place I never thought possible. I had built a life that was all my own, a life shaped by my choices, my passion, and my determination. The road had been long, and at times, it felt like I was walking it alone. But now, standing at the peak of my success, I realized that the most important thing wasn't the recognition or the external validation. It was the growth I had experienced along the way. I had learned to trust myself, to believe in my ability to create something meaningful and to live authentically. I had proven to myself that the dream I had was not only possible, but worth fighting for. There was a quiet pride that came with knowing I had followed my own path, despite the doubts and criticisms I faced along the way. It wasn't always easy, and there were moments when I wondered if I was on the right track. But now, looking back at everything I had achieved, I knew that every moment of struggle had been worth it. The support of my parents, the respect they had finally shown me, meant something, but it no longer defined me. I had become the person I always wanted to be, and that was more than enough. I had embraced my independence, not just in my career but in my life. And as I continued to create, to share my work with the world, I felt a sense of fulfillment that went beyond any award or recognition. It was a fulfillment that came from within, from knowing that I had done things my way, and that was the most powerful thing of all. The journey was far from over, but I was no longer afraid of what the future held. Whatever came next, I was ready. I had found my purpose, and nothing could take that away.